So, welcome everyone to the inaugural session of Industrial Tech Stack Live. We appreciate you joining us. I'm happy to see familiar faces here, and especially Julie Runez from Linen Industrial Services. Julie has done a great job with getting the conversation going within this community. She has put together two similar sessions to this one. We look forward to receiving the baton and growing this into a valuable community that will attract professionals who own these tech stacks and at industrial companies and beyond just marketers. My name is Salim Malouf. I'm an industrial engineer turned marketer and co-founder of Conveying Your Message, a sustainable growth agency focused on the industrial and manufacturing space. Don't think of me as your host. This is not a webinar or a presentation. Think of me more as your facilitator. This is an open floor for discussion. So I encourage you to come on stage and ask your questions, or simply just share your wins and losses when it comes to your own tech stacks. We're joined today by John Joyce from Bridger. I am sure many here are familiar with your work, but for those who aren't, can you please tell us a bit about yourself and the work you do with industrial companies?
Yeah, sure. I am a fractional CMO with industrial companies, so I help industry to do its marketing better overall. And then through my experience in marketing, I uncovered a lot of technical challenges that are affecting industrial companies and the whole revenue chain. And because of that, I created Bridger.io, which is an industrial integration platform to solve some specific problems that companies in this space are facing. So those are my two favorite things to talk about: marketing and technology.
Man, that spans the range of what we could be possibly talking about, I think. And just some background for why, we're starting this, trying to move this conversation forward. As Lee mentioned, Julie started this in the industrial marketing, live, or that's where we started talking about it in that community, and just thanks to Gorilla 76 for providing that space for us to have these kinds of conversations. And in my, 15 years in the space, I'm starting to find that this tech stack conversation, happens to get in the way of a lot of the marketing stuff that we, learn week in, week out from companies like Gorilla. And, I don't see a lot of conversations about it to talk about, effective ways. I mean, for me, it's often, and I've heard this from others as well, you hear about these nice new shiny objects or even tried and true tactics, and you think, oh, that would be cool. I don't know how I'm going to get that done in my organization. I certainly felt that way. And, once you dig in and understand that customer data is at the heart of how you execute a lot of these things, understanding where that data is buried in the organization is super important. And then you realize you don't have any control over those pieces of software. We just want to educate as much as we can on, where this data lives, why it's important to understand where it lives and how to access it, and understand why it's, so needed for really everything digital transformation and digital customer experience wise. So it's something we really are excited to continue this conversation, and excited to be here today. Thanks for joining us, John.
Yeah, glad to be here. Yeah, I think the tech issue, right, is like the elephant in the room that never gets talked about. People invest so much money in platforms, don't implement them well, don't get really used, don't think of the technology like in the big picture. So you've got different departments implementing different technologies without even talking to each other, or any number of scenarios that happens. And when you talk to anybody in marketing, in sales, really in almost any aspect of the company, except generally the people who are just processing orders at the ERP and they just live in the ERP, they're sometimes even just that, those people are unhappy. But if you zoom out on any other level where we're really talking about these systems, almost nobody's happy, right? Everybody's like, yeah, we have this system. It's been widgeted together over 20 years by 7 different people, and it sort of works and we are used to it. And okay, but in reality, it's limiting business, it's limiting sales, it's limiting marketing, it's limiting breaking down silos, which so many people are trying to do to experience growth. It's unscalable, it's unmaintainable. The knowledge is tribal. There's only like 3 people in the company who know how any of it works. And you end up with these scenarios where you're really actually kind of handicapped by your technology, but everybody's kind of afraid to face it because oftentimes you're talking about big dollars, either that whole sunk cost fallacy, like we spent $100,000 on this and we're not changing it, or the reverse of like, we don't want to spend, we know to fix this, we need to spend $100,000 or $1 million or whatever it is, and whatever your number is, it's scary. So instead, what we talk about everything else and nobody ends up ever talking about it, but here's this thing that is really handicapping so many different facets of the company and never gets addressed. And when Julie started posting about it and just talking about it, really, like, it's one of the few times I've seen anybody just kind of stand up and say, this whole thing is kind of a mess. Nobody knows what they're doing. And somehow everybody ends up with these pieced together Frankenstein systems. And it's kind of a problem. And we should be talking about this more. And just because it's tech, somehow we're not qualified, or maybe we don't think we know enough to talk about it. I don't know what the limiting factor is, why people don't talk about it, but it's like the skeleton in the closet of the business. It's like, yeah, the business looks all good and sales are great and everything. You get inside and nobody's happy with how the systems are, and everything's a complete mess, and we're sending Excel spreadsheets back and forth and that kind of thing. So it's a great combo to have. Speaking
of scary visuals, do you want to share one of our own?
Yeah.
So this is the situation that John just described. Do you want to talk us through it?
Yeah, sure. So, this is super typical. Company's been in business for 20 years, something like that, maybe longer, and they've just slowly grown, and they've just slowly added things that meet some specific need in some silo. And so they're actually reinforcing with the tech decisions they're making, the silos of their various different departments. And most of these things are chosen with no consideration of anybody else in the company. So, hey, we need an ERP. We're just choosing it based on accounting needs, order invoicing and things like that. Or we need a HubSpot because we want to do marketing, or we need a ticket system. It's very rare that somebody above, like somebody at the architectural level, is making any of these decisions. It's like departmental heads making decisions for what they want to do. And then result is this. It's just like a disjointed system where nothing talks to anything particularly well, and nobody has any visibility into what anybody else is doing outside of their little area. And you get like these emails here is sneaker net sharing of data. Like, you might as well print out faxes and hand them to each other when an order comes in, because we really have no idea what this customer's history is. And they place a ticket, I've got to go look somewhere else to find out what they're doing or what they have been doing or who they are. So
John, you're joking about the faxes, but companies till this day are still passing around stacks of paper for orders.
Totally.
Yeah. I'm glad you highlighted that, because that, like, for me, one of the missions is like, how do we get here, and how do these super successful companies like survive in these situations? And what I recently witnessed is that this digital space exists because whoever brought in the new thing or somebody asked for it. But the only way these people, the customer facing teams, survive is that they're still doing the printing. There is some kind of verbal communication, direct happening. And this data exists, but the real communication is happening one-to-one. And then as we look at, before COVID, like, that's how it worked. And now you start to remove things, and just the pace of these emails in between these systems. And we've got the customer in the background here, just, being overwhelmed by it, or it's happening to them, not for them really. And that the pace of that just, it kind of exploded. So the systems just progressively get, more complicated, not necessarily complex, but just more complicated for no reason. And,
Right.
This is where it's like, okay, each of these projects takes like a year or two, and don't ever talk to me again about doing another one. So then you have
Yeah.
all these people that are like, we all hate the system, but nobody knows how to fix it.
Right. And you end up with this, just like a whole bunch of technical debt, right? You've sunk costs, which you're afraid to change, but at the same time, you have a bunch of technical debt, because when you need to move forward, everything is broken, and nothing has ever been touched. And so it's sort of a monumental task. The longer you've kind of put up with this, there is a momentum, like an inertia to not changing, that just grows until it hits some breaking point, usually, right? There's some breaking point. But yeah, I think this, the way the customer is portrayed here, kind of highlights the mess, and confusion, that as it would relate to a customer experience. You talk to one person, they don't know what's going on in another department. Sales or CRM doesn't know. I mean, CSRs don't know what marketing is sending out. Oh, we're having a special. CSRs don't know anything about it. The sales guys don't know anything about it either. And the website actually doesn't give you any special. And when somebody does buy it, the invoice goes out screwed up, because the ERP people weren't on board either, and you have this whole scenario, and it's like, what the heck's going on? You guys are a bunch of clowns.
Yeah. So I think as we like, and obviously this is just a piece of the picture when it comes to technology stacks. So one distinction we're going to continue to make is, you see these diagrams, and especially when marketing people are talking about it, it's very, marketing customer focused. But then we have this, IoT world where, some of these companies are actually super like they manage their data when it comes to quality and product. Like they're truly at the front of this movement of data management. It's just not the people, right? And now you have things like GDPR and, just the need to interact with people online. Now, all of a sudden, this customer data exists in new places. And that's where, for this conversation, we are going to focus on where the customer data lives. But I think we might be surprised at how many systems that customer data touches. So, and John, you mentioned that there's usually a breaking point, right, before people act. Can you highlight a couple that you've seen? Because I've had a tough time finding them myself,
The
So I'm
breaking
curious.
points.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the most common breaking point is a competitor has a better customer experience than you do, and then you're losing business to them. So because of your inability, this I think is probably the most likely thing that's going to do it. When the company is trying to be strategic about growing, and they're seeing that they can't execute XYZ customer experience, whatever it is. Like we've talked about before, we want the pizza tracker of where my order is, and I want to be able to see that online and know exactly what's going on with my order, my back order, when are the different components, what's holding it up. I want like deep access into that kind of information at just a click of the mouse, right? That's just a scenario. And then some competitor can provide that and you can't provide it. And people are calling up and saying, I have to call you to get the information. And then I call the CSR and they don't know. They can't actually answer. They say, well, I have to call somebody else, have a sidebar discussion with the production team to find out what's going on with the order, and I'll call you back. And okay. And the other guy, I just log in and it tells me everything that's going on the website. So that customer experience is directly related to your tech stack's ability, like the ability of all those different people just to share knowledge without having to like call each other. and share knowledge like manually. And when the executives who are trying to grow the company as a whole see that they can't do what the customer wants enough times or with enough important customers, then it's okay, this is a problem and we need to fix it because XYZ customer is pissed, excuse my language, and they're going to leave if we don't solve this. And then they have the meeting where it's like, bring in IT, bring in whoever, and why can't we solve this? And everybody says stuff that nobody understands, and then they walk away frustrated, and it's like, okay, well, what do we do? And that goes on, probably a year or two until really I just had this conversation with Joe Sullivan, like it only changes when the CEO, no offense, CEOs out there, but it's your fault. When the CEO decides this is absolutely important because I got to get all these different teams on board for change, and everybody hates that. So nobody's adopting it like, yeah, let's do this. They all say, yeah, that's a problem. Yeah, we should fix it. Are we going to do anything? No. So until the CEO is like, no, this is actually like a priority and we're doing it, you're doing it, then it never changes. So that's what I think has to happen. That customer pain, it works its way up until like the CEO notices it, takes it seriously and says, no, this has to change. And then the organization will change. That's the only driver I've ever personally witnessed. Maybe there's others out there. Maybe Julie or Madeline have something to say on that. What do you guys think?
Yeah, you vocalized like everything that we have been feeling and thinking over the past few months. So that's just crazy. But I something that I've noticed is the leadership team sometimes doesn't see a problem because customers aren't complaining about it. And so then, sometimes they'll be like, well, is it even worth considering? Are we losing business to this? But what I wish people would realize is there's so much business that we are losing that we don't even know about because we're not able to market this experience. Yeah. So like we don't know what we're losing out on yet. We can't wait, and they're not going to call us, tell us, we wish you had XYZ presented on your website. Otherwise, we're not going to work. They're not going to reach out to let us know that they don't want to work with us. So yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah, that's true. By the time the pain, if nobody's looking for it, which they might not be, by the time it reaches the CEO, it's critical. Because you're right, like somebody who will take the time to tell you about it, and for that to be loud enough to get to the CEO, then for every one of those, there's 10 customers that just silently ghost you, right? So then you don't even know, or maybe their order volume is just going down, they're not even gone yet, or the big order that they were working on that you don't know about didn't come to you, it just went to the other guy, So yeah, that's that is a major problem because people aren't even like in the headspace of thinking about this until it's already a serious problem. Like if you're a CEO and you're starting to hear about this stuff, it's exponentially a bigger problem than what you think it is, because for what feedback you're receiving is just a little tiny slice of what the problem really is. But if you're in the company, say you're a marketing person and you're trying to make organizational change happen because you're aware that this is a problem, this is a way that you can take initiative to elevate the seriousness of it to a CEO, which is customer research. So as a marketer, you often do customer research and you're talking to the customer. You can specifically go after this issue and try to raise the awareness of it up the food chain and say, look, our customers are saying that this is a problem. I think it's super common. Thanks for sharing all that, though.
In fact, Julie just echoed that sometimes your customers are being very vocal about what they are looking for, and the first supplier to deliver that is going to win.
Yeah.
So you've talked, John, about being proactive. The CEO puts out a mandate, and suddenly people are starting to look for solutions. Could you like describe, in your experience, how these solutions look like in the field?
Well, actually, I know one of your other graphs, one of your other diagrams that you have there, sort of is like another version of iterating towards hopefully a working system. And this is when what normally happens, I think, in my experience, is that you get attention in some area. So instead of addressing the big picture, we fix some sort of slice of it. So we might fix on the manufacturing side, like you had talked about, Chris, like manufacturers will have their data together on the production side. They'll have figured out some of these problems, but just like in one wheelhouse, not like across the whole organization. So maybe some team leader has implemented something, if he has kind of like that level of clout over that silo, and he might say, the the COO is like, no, on the operations side, we just need to really get this integrated and get this together. And he or she implements a working tech stack, but just in their silo. And then that's the next kind of step of this, or he gets the approval of the CEO to fix it in his area. And so you start with total chaos. Then they start identifying like little areas where, okay, we need to fix it, but we're only going to fix it here because this is where it's a real problem. And then you end up with this diagram where you might have certain silos that communicate well with each other or are well integrated within themselves, but then the greater, bigger picture is still disconnected. So I think that's kind of like the next step. As things are just like naturally evolving. I don't think there's hardly anybody who comes in like from the completely disjointed stage and says, we're just rebooting and building an entire new architecture from the ground up. Usually it's iterative like this. So again, the next step is this kind of a
In a
this
in a
kind of a
perfect
system.
world, would you say that would be a good approach, to just ditch the whole mess and start over, or that's not a realistic proposition?
I don't think so personally. I mean, I know this might be more painful, but I think that this is easier to accept organizationally. So like just from the psychological standpoint, I think making gradual growth towards it. I don't know if you guys have ever, this is just like a totally side story. It has nothing to do with anything, but I think it illustrates the purpose of like the concept of the debt snowball. Like, have you ever read about getting out of debt and consumer debt? Like, oh, we need to get out of consumer debt. And instead of saying, let's pay off the mortgage, it's the biggest thing we owe. It'll take us 20 years of working to pay that mortgage off. But if we paid that off, it would be amazing. But they do, but accountants or whatever will suggest things like, no, pay the little things off, pay your dumb credit card off, pay, this little loan that you have, and then pay the car off. And then you're rolling up like this up until you get, you're rolling all those payments into like one bigger payment that you can then slam against something else. The reason why they suggest things like that isn't because makes the most pure dollar sense, but because it makes the most sense humanly, psychologically, to feel like, oh, we're getting somewhere. We haven't just like spent 20 years and didn't get anywhere until we finally paid the mortgage off. We paid off a little thing at a time, a little thing at a time, and each time we're making progress, and eventually we'll get where we want to go. All right, all that to say, this is that approach in tech. You're saying, could you say, yeah, we're just gonna like save up until we can pay off every debt that we have and then pay them all off at once? That's possible, but I think your failure rate would be high. So if you say, no, we're going to start small and we're going to actually accomplish something, even if we have to undo it later, or roll it into something else later, at least we're making progress. I think that's a smarter way to go about it. So it's may not look as nice as like, hey, yeah, we're just going to replace everything. But I don't think psychologically people can do that. And people are running companies. So like companies can't do it. You could start smart. Okay. I think a lot of people start smart nowadays. There's a lot of info out there, and there's no reason why you can't start thinking big. But if you're just randomly, organically built something to get it to stage 5, you're going to want to go through stage 2, 3, and 4, probably. What do you guys think?
Julie has an interesting question. Do you want to go ahead?
Sure, thanks. Yeah, John, I'm curious about where you fall on, sort of having like the best tool for each task in your company versus having one tool that can handle multiple things well and making some concessions on maybe, ideal functionality just for the sake of simplicity and keeping your tech stack smaller and more focused.
Yeah, that's an excellent question, Julie. I think there's no easy answer to that, though. There isn't a one size fits all. I think you really have to look at your needs. I think it's great. Like, for instance, with one client that I have, we already had HubSpot in there on the marketing side. And then they were looking at a CRM, and they were looking at a ticketing system for the CSRs. And all 3 of those exist in HubSpot, right? And ideally, I would say just use the HubSpot ones, and then the ticketing people can even see what the people are looking at on the website, and when you're processing any kind of information about the customer, you can see what they've experienced on the service side, as well as on the sales side, if they're using the sales part of HubSpot, as well as on the marketing side. I think that's ideal when those things work for you. But I do think there is sometimes when that solution, whatever it might be, just has some critical missing component, right? So the HubSpot ticketing system isn't the absolute best ticketing system. And it may not be the right solution for your company because of some limitation that it has, because HubSpot isn't perfect. There's things it doesn't do everything. Nothing does everything. So the answer is you just have to consider that all those things, like, okay, here's the HubSpot ticketing system. Here's how it would work. Here's the benefits. I think it's important to consider the benefits of the visibility that you get by having integrated systems. I think that's underrated. Okay. People with their siloed blinders on are just like, okay, I just need ticketing features. I've never had visibility into all this other data, so it must be worthless. I need ticketing features. I think it's important to get out of that mindset and be like, okay, a uniform platform, or platforms that talk extremely well to each other, gives you that visibility, and that is worth something. But it may not be worth everything. So then you have to weigh and say, okay, we're getting these extra things, but it misses this functionality. Is it a deal breaker? But I think ideally, if you can adopt a single platform, for instance, like a HubSpot or a very well integrated platform, then that's a better solution if it doesn't have a deal breaking flaw in it for you. That's a long answer to your question.
Is it possible to get visibility with custom integration? Or is that sort of, it's got to kind of be native, or you miss out on it?
I think some data definitely can be shared, but I think unless a system is designed for it, or you have some system that's designed to give you visibility, it might be hard to have events that are tracked by a sales system show up in a meaningful way in a ticketing system so that you have visibility into it. That's where you might actually have to have a third system to that's providing you business intelligence and visibility, which you do have those systems like I know you guys use your dashboard system with ClickUp. It's like a way that you can have a third system that can provide a place where you put data for the sake of visibility, but you're introducing another system there. So in a single platform solution, that's already built in because it's built for that. You can look through if you have access, you can look through all the different tabs and see literally who called them, what salesman called them on what day, or what person answered their support ticket, or what the question was about. Or even if they chatted on the website with somebody, like all of that data is in one place. It's really nice to see it. An integrated system gives you that.
Yeah, and I think like what you just mentioned about ClickUp, it's interesting how systems like ClickUp, just because of their flexibility and focus on visibility and communication, I'm seeing all sorts of use cases pop up just because, somebody has an ERP, a CRM, and now they just get a taste of something like ClickUp, and they're like, okay, I can actually do stuff in the system. I'm going to try to do, as much as possible just because it's easy. There's no worry about breaking the whole thing. Like, and like um, and I think what I've seen from custom integrations, the visibility is where you're going to want it to be. But the challenge with them is like, if you don't highlight that visibility up front, like it gets harder and harder to change it after the fact. And that's where custom integrating into these, older systems, or when they don't have open APIs, like you could do whatever you want to do with when you have talented people like John to go to. But that's where it's like, okay, to break into this system, we got to set up this very specific structure. And if you didn't mention that piece of data up front, now we have to rethink the whole structure. And that's what's super interesting for me, to see how some of these systems, especially as we've integrated like CPQ into HubSpot, it's like I've learned like a very different way to approach these systems, just because I've been lucky enough to grow up in the HubSpot ecosystem, and that just stuff is way easier. And it was always surprising to me when just the differences. It's like, how has this cloud platform existed? Like, it's just such a different experience, even to the point of people get wowed all the time by how, like, oh really, I just have to click this button, like I just have to drag it over here. Like, okay, I'm not used to that. Usually I got to go get my developer. So it's interesting to see ClickUp as another platform, and just how it's, like a task management, project management tool at the beginning, but all these different use cases, just because it's so easy to make stuff visible, right? Internally and externally. And that's where I think, like, getting into this last version, Salim, of the times where people do decide to wipe clean, John, and start, with some system to rule them all, it's almost always from the ERP side of things, which makes sense because that's the accounting, that the money's got to be right. But take us through, what happens when people try to do this.
If you don't mind, I want to share an experience I've had. I used to work at a global industrial group that had a North American arm, and that global group had a heavily customized instance of Microsoft AX. It wasn't Dynamics yet, and they brought all of that expertise that's been working worldwide to the US. And the first thing that they noticed is that heavily customized instance, because there was so much customization happening in it, it was 5-6 years old, like out of date, because you can't just keep updating everything. So we were trying to connect with 6-year-old systems. and trying to get customer visibility, something as simple as order notifications. We were engaged in a project that took 12 months with two different project, I'm going to call them leads, but they were like project champions from each department. And the whole point was to try to figure out a way to hack into Outlook so it can take data from the ERP and send notifications. The funny piece is we had HubSpot marketing. And for them, that was an easier ask than trying to develop, a custom integration with this heavily customized ERP to connect with HubSpot. For them, that was a bigger lift than, figuring out the wheel again. And so I just wanted to say, like, after 12 months, the project resulted in like no progress, and it was dropped. So after 12 months, no customer is getting notifications. Sorry, floor is to you, John.
No, that's a great example. I've actually had a very similar scenario, almost identical, except we'd solved it. But yeah, you can do transactional email through HubSpot, and you can use other services to do transactional email through integrations. But again, you're adding on more and more platforms, right? You're adding on more and more pieces. So I think this stage here that you have up here, okay, after you have siloed, integrated silos that are not integrated with each other, then oftentimes you get to some breaking point where we say we're going to go to an ERP upgrade that does like almost everything, but it won't do everything. So then you have like a few things that it doesn't do that are on the outside that either don't integrate at all, or integrate partially and poorly, but a large portion of the business is functionally integrated. This is a common next step, right? So, but this still doesn't solve all the pain. And interestingly, like in my opinion, you almost roll backwards to get to the next step, which go ahead and go to the last one, which I have seen this implemented. A lot of times, all this stuff on the left might be that ERP stack, or it might be an ERP stack and a couple other things. Because what happens is the ERP, like roll it all into one software, doesn't totally work. It works like 90%, but there's some pieces missing. So we have these other pieces that are bolted on to make up the areas where it's falling short. Like the PIM in NetSuite isn't good enough. So we have a PIM system that's better that we jack into NetSuite, and we're still using HubSpot for marketing or something like that. But a ton of the functionality is in the ERP or whatever platform it is. So then the next layer is this. So what you're doing here is you're just using the data warehouse. It's just an integration layer, right? So basically in this system, your IT at some point says, this is nuts. We've got all these different systems that we're trying to interconnect. Actually, when you're scaling, sometimes through acquisitions and stuff, you run into these kind of problems. Okay, so you can't just buy a company and then make them jump on your ERP. Like it's like a brain transplant, right? So then you have systems you just can't integrate. So how do you solve that problem? And the solution is IT builds you an integration platform of some sort, and that in modern technology nowadays is kind of called a data lake, which means you just dump all your data in one place, and IT works on pulling it from this single repository, which is like a giant Google Drive for data, and tapping that into other systems. So now it's actually, the complexity is kind of going backwards, right? You're actually going back to more complicated, but it's the next step. So you've just kind of realized that there isn't one solution that's nice and simple, and business is complex, and your company is growing, and you need something that's scalable. and this solution is scalable, and you can bolt as many of these columns of blue boxes onto that data lake as you need. So you buy some company in Italy, it has a whole different stack. Maybe it's integrated, maybe it's not. It has its own set of blue boxes. They go on the right side and they plug into the data warehouse, and we can share data back and forth between these systems. And that's why these things exist, to make it real easy for you to dump data in a place, and IT can wire these systems together for you, or an integrator like me can help wire these systems together for you so things talk. And then you end up using tools like ClickUp or Microsoft BI, or different things like that to visualize your data, because now it's so complicated, you can't even understand it, and your ERPs don't even understand it. So you have to have separate systems that you're putting all the data in one place over here, and you have another system that's just analyzing that data and producing insights for you. So your CEOs or people at the very top level can see, well, we have all these business units and these different companies, and they're all doing different things. They're all on different tech stacks. How do I see everything? And that is this, which is more or less the ultimate step. Like, you've outgrown the, Oracle, NetSuite, Microsoft Dynamics does everything. It doesn't do everything. And this is the next iteration. We actually go back to complexity, but hopefully at this point, we're big enough that we can manage the complexity smartly, and somebody has realized it's a problem. It's not accidental complexity. It's actually designed complexity.
In fact, the example that I had mentioned, the company I was at, I still am in touch. The head of IT is a friend, and he recently started a conversation with me talking about exactly that, which is they're now looking into not getting out of Dynamics, but figuring out a data warehouse solution. That way, Dynamics is not the roadblock for these other disparate systems that just can't manage to connect to Dynamics directly. So there's definitely a move towards this kind of architecture. And this kind of answers Julie's question of, if you're able to support such a architecture, now you can choose the best tool for each job and just simply connect all of them to the same data warehouse or same data lake.
Right. And at this point, though, you either have relationships or people who can make these things happen. So like, your team is actually changing as you're going through this whole journey of industrial tech stack development, from we don't have anybody doing any of this, everybody's making their own decisions, to no, there's people who are designing how we're going to move data around at the highest levels of the company, and architecting systems that work together. And that's like their job, or possibly an entire department's job at this point. And I've worked with companies like this. It's much easier to integrate with them. They already have a solution for how we're going to integrate with all these, we have a data lake, just Azure blob storage, just stuff your data in there. We'll figure out how to get it out. Whatever the solution is, but they kind of have a kind of like an ingress solution, if you want to call it that. So they have a pattern for like, how are we going to tack something on to this stack? And they've already thought, well, where are we going to see the data? And how are we going to give each person the little weird thing that they want, the little, their little software, but still have complete visibility and total control. The other thing that comes in at this kind of level is security, information control, security. It gets super complicated at this level, right? So at this point, IT has usually owned it. And they're saying, we're architecting this kind of system, and we can control where the data is and who has access to it, and that kind of thing. So your IT department has kind of grown up to that by this point in the slides. Nobody jumps from that first slide to this slide. Like, that's just like crazy talk, right? In my experience, you have to go through this whole weird process of like, we've got systems that don't talk. Oh, now we have some systems that talk. Oh, now we're going to centralize everything to make everything talk better. And then now we've overwhelmed that centralized system, and it's just out of control. And we really need to build an architecture a platform, a company platform, that's bigger than just even one business sometimes. So that's the journey as I've witnessed it. But I'm
Yeah,
sure there might be another step after this. I don't know what it is though.
I think that that platform mindset is the key. But really, I think what's missing is the understanding of how important the customer visibility is to all this. Because when you mentioned before, the ERPs, 90% of what they're doing is great. And I think that was probably the case before COVID, and you could get away with that 10% being super bad because it's really the customer data and the communications management. Like none of them do it well. And because they weren't built to do that, even though
Right.
they all have some kind of CRM add-on, right? But it's interesting. The other time I've seen these monster, you know, try to do everything in one is like the Salesforce instances that, even I made that error in the beginning. It's like, oh, I can have a work order in here. I can have quotes in here. Like, let me get a developer. And I think from this conversation, it's kind of like, can we look at it from, there's manufacturing data and then there's customer data. And when looking at the whole platform, you have to, now more than ever before, you have to understand the customer data, how that's flowing, where it exists, like all the regulations and, lean principles that you follow, that you must follow on the manufacturing side. Sometimes more and more of those are entering the customer data realm. And like, when you're connecting all these systems, most of the time, especially when you want a customer to see it, you got to at least have some identifying feature in these manufacturing systems to connect. Right. And that's where what we've seen, it's just, okay, we need that field. Let's add a field for name. Right. It might be in these 10 different places of the ERP, but now we can see it. So I think the customer data aspect is going to be something, we continue to talk about. And that 90-10, like the 10%, that was how much it mattered maybe, before COVID. Now it's like, if you're not handling your customer data and communications properly, you're not going to survive. So that's where, ultimately this conversation, that's what's holding companies back from growth. Like they can't wrap their minds around this. And we just want to, continue these sessions, this conversation to try and help with that, because there are answers out there. And, I love the light bulb that goes off when people see how easy something is that they thought was super hard or was going to take a year. And there's just so many systems that are trying to solve for this. It's challenging because they all take a we can do everything approach. So you have to, wade through all that stuff. But, coming at it from the customer perspective, you can keep that top of mind and have it. It's got to at least, I mean, for me as the marketer, I think it's more important than the product data that's flowing around and stuff. And as we go towards customer experience being the differentiator, it makes sense that's if it's not already, it's more important. It's going to be more important in the long run than, as product quality becomes table stakes. Like, yeah, you need to be monitoring that, but ultimately what differentiates you is how you handle your customer data and customer communications.
I agree. I think it's super easy in all of this tech talk to lose sight of the humans, both in the company and the customers. Can be forgotten along the way of doing any of this growth path that we've kind of laid out here, this evolutionary steps. We focus on the tech, the platforms, and solving these kind of problems, and oftentimes forget about the customers and even the employees. And sometimes we forget about even the bottom line benefits, the big picture benefits. Like you can lose sight of all of this stuff and it's like becomes, you get lost in the forest, but you actually forget why you're doing any of it. And so then you end up making bad decisions or bad designs, And some of that is because usually it's too late by the time a company makes somebody responsible for customer experience as it relates to the technology that is a limiting factor, or even processes in the company that are limiting factors to that customer experience. And like have a CX driven mindset. Like you start out small, you're very CX driven. Like when you're just like a couple of person shop, all you're thinking about is what the customer needs, and you'll invent ways of doing things to make sure the company's happy. And when that company scales, like that gets completely lost, and you have to, systemize processes and technology in order to recreate that kind of an experience. And that's why when we go to small boutique places, we feel like, oh yeah, this is like such a great experience. I walk in, that guy knows exactly what I'm here for. He knows I come in on Tuesdays, and he has it ready, like the corner coffee shop or something. Like they see you walk in the door, they're already making your coffee. Like they know who you are, what you want. That's easy when it's just in one person's head. But when it's a huge company with platforms and all this stuff, if there isn't a person who's saying we need to make decisions based on that one guy who's going to come in and he's going to want us to know what he wants before he even asks for it, we want him to have that experience. It doesn't happen if there isn't that person up at the top thinking like that. And unfortunately, like we get into the weeds way before somebody actually starts thinking like that. Usually it's responding to like some sort of crisis, some crisis driven thing. And we're so focused on solving a problem. And before we know it, we're like 3 steps into the woods, and nobody remembers why the heck we're doing any of this. And, the guy comes in and you still get his order wrong.
John, thank you so much for this amazing conversation. This has been very helpful, and I'm actually excited to, keep the conversation going. Anyone who registered will be receiving a recorded version of this call. And thank you for everyone who's been here. Our next session is going to be on the 30th of November, featuring Julie, who was the first to facilitate this a serious conversation around industrial tech stacks, and she will be sharing her findings with us. And until then, you should definitely check out her blog post about it. I just put a link in the chat. She kind of distills her findings. And again, thank you for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you in the next one.